This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Thom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. We've got a most interesting show for you, starting with our panel questioning whether the legislature's crossover deadline really means anything anymore, along with what made the crossover and what didn't. Next, we preview Tuesday's special primary election in the 9th Congressional District and ponder whether there's going to be a runoff. Then we ask why Senator Thom Tillis got a primary opponent for the 2020 election. And of course, as always, we ask our analysts to tell us something we don't know. We welcome to our panel this week Linda Coleman, former legislator, former candidate for Congress, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Rob Schofield of NC Policy Watch, and Rick Henderson, editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. We'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com. Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Before we get down to business, we want to give a shout out to the Carolina Hurricanes and their success so far in the National Hockey League playoffs, with the exception of last Thursday night. It's amazing the number of hockey fans the Canes are generating all across Carolina, so let's go Canes, and let's us get started. Thursday was the crossover deadline in our legislature, meaning most bills that have been filed must pass one house or the other in order to be considered during the remainder of the session. More than 400 bills qualified to be considered after the crossover. We want our panel to talk about it, and some that made it, some that didn't, what we can expect for the rest of the session. Linda Coleman, you served in the legislature, and in the past that crossover deadline was a do-or-die situation. But this year particularly, and in some recent years, lawmakers are increasingly using a ploy to strip language out of a bill that's already been passed and insert new language in it. Most people don't approve of this, but it's essentially made the crossover deadline kind of obsolete, hasn't it?
Well, I don't think so. You know, crossover is one of those things that really is considered the peak of what we sometimes lovingly refer to as crazy town. So, but, you know, it does serve several purposes. For one thing, I would say that crossover serves the purpose of limiting the number of laws that govern us. And as you know, the General Assembly is steeped in tradition. And I think that crossover is one of those traditions that just won't go away. But the other thing that it does is it limits the number of, not only limits the number of bills that govern us, but it also helps to determine those laws that are important.
It saves time in the rest of the session.
Yeah, important to laws that are important
Rick,
to us.
In past years, we've had late night sessions with committee meetings being called and the floor being called to order and voting on things. And None of that happened this year. Why?
A couple of reasons. One was something that was a complete anomaly, and that is that the two chamber leaders, Senator Phil Berger and House Speaker Tim Moore, both were to preside over a meeting of Republican state legislators, I believe, in Asheville. And that meeting convened during the week this week. And so what they decided to do is they decided to make the unofficial crossover date Tuesday or maybe Wednesday if necessary. And so they cut off business a little bit earlier than usual. But you also have other factors unique to this session in that without a veto-proof majority in the General Assembly anymore, Republicans probably are limiting what they think they want to try to get through because they don't want to have to deal with as many override votes as they might deal with otherwise. And we still have redistricting.
Well, but, okay, let's talk about that first part. You would have thought that there was going to be more bipartisan cooperation in this session. You strip away all, I mean, the House put together a budget with no input virtually from Democrats. There hasn't been that bipartisan cooperation that's been projected. What does that tell you about what we're getting ready to see for the rest of the session?
Well, I think it's going to continue to be a fight. I really think there is a scenario in which they should have come together and negotiated some things. I think they still can. I think they still can with respect to the budget. I used to be a lobbyist way back in the day in the state of Illinois, and at the end of the session, the governor and the four leaders sat down and cut a budget deal. Basically didn't go through this, having this veto having to be issued, and hopefully that's the kind of approach they'll take going forward. But I mean, right now it looks like it's still a very partisan environment. The Republicans, though, I think Rick is right, didn't drive the bulldozer up and just shovel everything through because they realized it's a different environment now. We can't pass everything we want. We've got to be a little more selective.
So the House has passed a budget. The Senate says they'd like to pass theirs by June 1. John, you're saying the governor's going to veto it.
He's going to veto it because it will not include Medicaid expansion, and he's made it virtually explicit, if not very explicit, that he's going to veto the budget. It's like everybody assumes that the budget is headed for a veto. Remember that unlike at the federal level, a veto of a budget plan for the coming 2 fiscal years, 1921, does not mean the government will shut down. There are the state-funded programs at least will follow last year's budget, so there's no government shutdown. However, there are some things that require state action to draw down federal dollars that wouldn't happen if a budget doesn't occur, and that could lead to some interesting developments. We are assuming it's a lot of just people staring at each other all summer, which is possible, but it is also possible there could be a series of individual bills passed that are basically money bills that fund a particular thing to draw down federal money, and if the governor vetoes those, that becomes a political difficulty.
Our co-panelist and friend Becky Gray, who spends a lot of time over in the legislature, said this is going to be a long, hot summer. It'll be a long time before this budget gets passed. Let's deal with some of these crossover bills. Probably, Rick, the most controversial is the bill requiring sheriffs to work with ICE so far as detaining undocumented immigrants. Would you agree with that?
Well, that's one of them, certainly. That's one that's also developed an awful lot of tension between local law enforcement, some agents of whom do not want to be forced to cooperate with the federal government. There's a question of subsidiarity, who's actually in charge here. And it's going to be something that's going to.
And the Sheriff's Association has opposed this. Yeah. Let me ask you: there haven't been any after all the discussion about redistricting, all the court cases and everything that's gone. Not any redistricting bills been passed by either house. Lots of discussion. Some suggest they're waiting on further Supreme Court or appellate court decisions. Is that why we haven't seen any redistricting?
That would be my guess, that the Supreme Court, of course, the North Carolina Supreme Court as well as the U.S. Supreme Court have pending cases in redistricting, and some of them have already been before the federal courts, and now, since they're already in the Supreme Court, there's not a whole lot that can be looked at.
Rob, a bill that was passed this past week would allow, we're talking about school vouchers, which were originally designed for low-income people to be able to have assistance going to private schools. Well, the bill this week passed. A family of 4 now making $71,000 a year can qualify for private school vouchers. What do you think of that?
Not happy about it. Former Majority Leader Paul Stam once said he wanted every school in North Carolina to be a voucher school. I think that's the right's agenda. It continues to be that, is to defund traditional public education as we've seen it. The vouchers these schools are unaccountable. They teach absurd stuff like that dinosaurs walked with humans at one point. They teach that, that they discriminate against families with gay parents.
Well, and there were charter
problem.
school bills passed, John. Several of them would, for instance, one would would allow low-performing virtual charter schools, which have been very problematic in this state, to enroll more students, even though they continue not to perform well. The other, so far as charters, we've lifted the cap on charter schools.
Right.
What do you think about these school choice?
Well, I wasn't surprised that they made that change on the what had been an enrollment cap for low performing. Of course, it's not specific to low performing. The two virtual charter schools happen to be low performing. I think that in the long run, the performance of those schools is going to affect whether those charters get reauthorized.
Linda, another bill that I found fascinating because it started off very, very good motives, the distracted driving bill. The language in this bill says that your hands cannot be occupied in a distracted manner. Now, that means you can't be, I think, having a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi-Cola in North Carolina. You can't be having, you can't smoke a cigarette, you can't talk on your phone. But it doesn't, it's very, very unusual. It doesn't even spell out what distracted means or the penalties.
And that's the problem with a lot of bills that get through the General Assembly. They are so vague in content that they are very hard to enforce. And so you're going to have an unenforceable bill at the end of the day.
Rick, another one was the Second Chance Act, which allowed persons who's had charges dismissed or have been found not guilty to expunge any evidence of this from the record. At first blush, it seems like that's fairly common sense.
Yeah, and it's something that had strong bipartisan support. It's one of the areas that the General Assembly is working together in a lot of ways, and that's criminal justice reform, especially on the juvenile end. It's a very good sign.
Another thing that we learned this past week, insofar as this was a Lumbee recognition bill, this is one that has been fairly controversial for many years.
Since the beginning of time.
Yeah, just to, well, to go back to Native Americans. Yeah. But anyway, so this one, is it going to pass the full assembly?
I mean, I think it's still a tough nut to crack. This has been an issue that we've been fighting over for years. Obviously, some people want it, some people see it as a threat. They see the potential down the road of casino gambling and all of these kinds of things. So I wouldn't count my chickens just yet on that one.
John, you talked a week or so ago, I want to conclude this subject, a week or so ago about the fact that in doing the House budget, there wasn't a large amount of surplus. Well, we just learned this week about the April surprise. And guess what?
Surprising.
It was very surprising this year. We could have as much as $700 million surplus as a result of tax.
On the revenue side, yeah.
Revenue side.
Well, it was a surprise. It was not, however, based upon higher than expected gains in wages, which drives most of income tax collections. It appears to be, and the fiscal staff is still working through the numbers, but it appears to be largely about investment gains, capital gains and dividends, which of course is good in the sense that you don't want to have less revenue, you want to have more revenue when you're making a budget together, but it means it's non-recurring, at least in part, so they have to be careful what they do with this money. I think it'll go into savings and maybe some capital things, and that would be the right way to use one-time money.
One-time money, yes. Let's switch gears here. When the evidence of voter fraud with absentee ballots was overwhelming, the State Board of Elections required a new vote for the 9th Congressional District. Now, Tuesday will be Election Day in that special election. All eyes are on whether or not a runoff will be required in the Republican primary. Democrat Dan McCready is running unopposed against a slate of 10 Republicans. Rick, State Senator Dan Bishop has been boasting of polls that show him with slightly more than the 30% that he would need to avoid a runoff. How likely is it that that could happen?
It could, but it's hard to tell because, first of all, polling in a special congressional race is always going to be somewhat undependable. And when you have 10 candidates, a primary like this, it's going to be really difficult to say if anyone can hit that 30% threshold. That 30% number is really important, though, because it used to be 40. And 30, there's a big difference between that when you have a lot of candidates running. Bishop has competition from Matthew Ridenour, former Mecklenburg County Commissioner. Also, we've got the Stony Rushing, the rather outrageous Union County Commissioner, who's running. There's some money coming in from realtors.
For Lee Brown.
For Lee Brown.
$1,300,000.
It's worth saying, by the way, that if the polls are even remotely accurate, he will certainly get over 30%. Because remember, if he had 31% with 20% or 30% undecided, they're going to break or disappear. And so if the polls are close to accurate, Bishop will win without a runoff. But the other point is, Stony Rushing is the second place in most of these polls, and he has said he would not call for a runoff.
Interesting. But Matt Ridenour released late this past week his own internal poll, which shows he has 32.9%. So the question is, whose poll do you believe here?
You only have to sweep your immediate family, I think, in this election to probably have a significant percentage. But I mean, I talked to Tom Jensen actually this morning. Tom runs public policy polling here in North Carolina. He's one of the most respected pollsters in the country. He said that Bishop's going to win. He thinks he's pretty confident that'll happen. He'll have over 30%. And then he said, and we're looking at one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, congressional race in U.S. history coming up for when the Democrat and the Republican meet.
Yeah, Linda, so far as it goes, we in the Triangle area have not heard a great deal about it. This has been a pretty interesting race particularly in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg TV market. And the candidates are running hot and heavy. They had a big debate, and following the UNC Charlotte shooting, obviously, during the debate, the gun control was the big issue, as you might expect. With Republicans, wasn't a whole lot of discussion of control. In fact, most of them were saying they think we need to put more guns in people's hands. How big an issue is this going to be?
I think gun control is going to be a fairly big issue. It doesn't matter where it is, because it is a topic that's so central to all of America at this point, and especially with all of the school shootings.
And Rick, this is the early voting numbers were lighter here than they were in the 3rd district. Any reason or explanation for that?
Possibility that people are still making up their minds about this. And also the district itself is extremely widely spread. And you've got Mecklenburg County, the southern part.
9 counties that are just.
And then you've got Fayetteville on the other side, and Robeson County. So you've got a situation where there's a huge amount of diversity between the residents of the 9th District. It's quite possible that the folks who are in, say, the Charlotte area aren't resonating with the folks that are more down east.
Lack of enthusiasm for any of the candidates, too. There's not, you don't hear a groundswell for any of them. I think Bishop's running ahead mostly, I think, because of name recognition.
Well, lack of enthusiasm for another election.
But is that going to help him in the general election? Because they're running against McCready, and HB2 was Bishop's he was the parent of HB2. He says it's time for it all to go away.
If there are municipal elections on the same date, then there will be.
And on September 10th,
there will be turnout. If that's not the same date, then that's
and then they have to file again in December, so we'll be doing this all over again.
I want to talk about, get a show of hands around the table here. How many of you think there will be a runoff? Or how many of you think it will be avoided? John?
I think the most likely outcome is no runoff. No runoff. That Bishop would win outright.
Okay.
But, obviously this is speculative.
Yeah, well.
And if there is one, it's in November, which means that the person who wins then has to file 3 weeks.
Oh, you mean the general is in November?
The general is in November.
The
runoff September, the general's in November. And then
runoff or not?
Right. I think a runoff. 10 candidates, that's a lot of candidates, 10. So it's going to be hard for anybody to pull off the 30% threshold there.
Yeah. What do you think?
Runoff, but very close. I think Bishop almost hits 30.
I think I stick with Tom Jensen. No runoff.
All right, no runoff from you. All right, well, regardless of who wins the special election, either in the 3rd or the 9th District, the new congressman, as Rob just said, is going to have hardly unpacked the boxes in Congress before having to run again in a 2020 primary next March. This election promises to be significant. Leading the ticket, of course, will be the presidential race. We're also going to have a U.S. Senate contest. It's looking like it could be pretty interesting. Incumbent Senator Thom Tillis now has a primary opponent, Raleigh's Garland Tucker III. Rob Schofield, you wrote a column this week saying that North Carolina is paying a price for Tillis's loyalty to President Trump. Explain that for us.
I'll do it quick. I mean, I think the bottom line is that Thom Tillis knows better. He knows that Donald Trump is a dishonest charlatan, and in his heart, I think he knows that. But he has made a deal with the devil. He's decided that his own political best interests are served by professing his loyalty to Trump. He did the flip-flop for all time on the emergency declaration. He's now, at one point, he was talking big about protecting the Mueller report. Now he says it's no big deal. I think it was the fear of the challenge in a Republican primary, which he's now going to get anyway, that has led him to embrace Trump and hold on to him as close as he possibly can. And I think it's a sad day because I think it's harming North Carolina in terms of getting emergency relief to our state. He ought to be speaking up for that instead of being loyal to Trump, who's blocking emergency relief.
We still are being held hostage on the Hurricane
because
Florence
Trump hates Puerto Rico, so he doesn't want to give emergency relief to anybody. He should be calling Trump out for that.
Yeah, after he came down here and told us the pocketbook was going to be open.
Yeah.
John, Thom Tillis is sort of in a no-win situation here, isn't he? I mean, he hasn't gone far enough to the right to satisfy Mark Meadows and the Freedom Caucus. On the other hand, he has been too loyal to President Trump to accumulate votes in a primary from moderates or particularly from unaffiliated voters. Has he got a problem in winning this primary?
Well, I think it's fair to say he's in a challenging situation, somewhat not of his own making, somewhat of his own making. I wouldn't call it no win. It's certainly possible he will be nominated and he will be elected in November. So I wouldn't call it no win, but it's certainly challenging. Full disclosure, I should say I know Garland Tucker well. I've served on boards with him. I've worked with him. I think he is doing this because he believes in the issues and so forth. There's no political game here. I think that Tillis will struggle in this primary based upon if what continues is what he started with, which is Garland Tucker is an anti-Trump liberal.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a very good argument.
Yeah, but Linda, you've run against an incumbent before in a congressional race. That power of the incumbency is pretty...
It's pretty powerful, but at the same time, I think there's a message for Thom Tillis in that you cannot sit on the fence with the conservative right. You've got to be either all in or you're out.
So far as it goes, Tillis isn't the only one who's having far-right problems. Richard Burr collected an awful lot of grief this past week because he and his co-chair in the Senate Intelligence Committee called Donald Trump Jr., subpoenaed him for testimony in the Senate. All the Trump supporters are saying this thing's over, it's over. He says it's not over. There's additional information that we need, and it's not related to the Mueller report. He's not running again, he says. Is that a good thing?
There's another over in here. It's called Oversight. And that's something that Congress is supposed to do of the executive branch. So what Senator Burr is doing is the right thing. And this is probably dealing with the emoluments clause, if you will. That's money that's being made privately while you're in public office. And Donald Trump Jr. is part of the Trump inner circle, as you would imagine. And so what Senator Burr is doing is the right thing.
I think it is indicative of the fact that we tend to think in America that we've got two ideological factions. We got Republicans and Democrats. What we fail to sometimes understand is that Republicans have factions of their own, as do the Democrats. And that makes it a very interesting, particularly as we get ready to go into 2020 and the elections, with primaries coming up in March of this coming year. Let's move to the part of the show where we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. John Hood, we'll start with you.
Tom, before the Great Recession, North Carolina ranked third in the country in higher education expenditures per student. Now we rank sixth in the country in higher education expenditures per student. There have been significant budget changes, tuition's gone up, but this is not a radical change in situation.
Linda, tell us something we don't know.
Well, if you thought 2018 was a year of the woman, beware of 2020 because of the three organizations that are coming together to form a supermajority of women to empower women with Cecile Richards at the head.
Right. Rick, tell us something we don't know.
Tax Foundation had its most recent summary of total tax burden, corporate tax burden, federal plus state. North Carolina ranks with the sixth lowest, and we are by far the lowest of any of our neighboring states.
Rob, I've got a minute. Tell us something we don't know.
Y'all may have talked about this before, but it deserves to be held up again, that there is a bill that is being held up in the Senate that would change the law on sexual assault in our states. Jeff Jackson, a senator from Charlotte, is sponsoring it. It's being held up, I think, for political reasons. We're the only state in the union that allows a person not to withdraw consent in the middle of a sexual assault. This needs to change.
It did not pass and make the crossover.
It did not make the crossover, and that was, I think, mostly political because they don't want Jeff Jackson to get the credit for it.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook, and join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
They're up before dawn and work late into the night. They believe in hard work, family, and doing the right thing. They stand up for their communities when others walk away. They're good people who just want a fair shake. They are farmers. At North Carolina Farm Bureau, we are proud to stand with our farmers.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com. Production underwriting provided by the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.